Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into this presentation on self-worth, and it's by
Oh yeah, Noel Ritzia.
Bill Rizzio, right?
She's a counselor, and she really digs into like what self-worth is, and even more importantly, like how we can actually, grow it.
Yeah, and how it all fits in with like all the other stuff in our lives. Like when I was looking at this, it reminded me so much of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh, totally.
Like that whole pyramid thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly what Ritsu does. She
Yeah.
she connects self-worth to Maslow's ideas, which I thought was like really fascinating.
Yeah, so to get us started, like how does Rizzio define self-worth in the first place?
Well, she calls it the foundation of mental health, which at first I thought was maybe a little dramatic.
Okay.
But then, the more I thought about it, the more I realized like she's kind of right. Because think about it. If you don't have that belief in yourself, that core sense of worth, it's going to impact everything else.
Everything.
Your relationships, your decisions, even just your ability to, get out of bed in the morning and face the day. And she breaks self-worth down into all these different components too,
Okay.
like esteem, self-image, love, acceptance, even self-compassion.
Right, so it's not just like one thing, it's like a whole bunch of interconnected pieces.
Exactly. And without them, like you're kind of missing, essential building blocks for a healthy life.
So then how does this whole Maslow's hierarchy thing tie into it? For anyone who hasn't seen that pyramid in a while, can you give us a quick refresher?
Oh, yeah, sure. So like at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got your basic needs.
Oh, just to survive.
Right, like food, shelter, just staying alive, right. Then you move up to safety and security,
Well,
feeling safe in your environment. Then it's belonging and love, like having connections with other people. And then above that is esteem, which is kind of where self-worth starts to come in more strongly.
like feeling good about yourself and what you're doing.
Exactly. And then right at the top, the peak of the pyramid is self-actualization, which Maslow described as, like reaching your full potential.
But even he wasn't sure if most people ever got there, right?
Yeah, he was kind of skeptical about that.
So how does Rizzio fit self-actualization into all of this? Because she seems a lot more optimistic about it than Maslow was.
Yeah, well, her point is that it's not necessarily about like reaching this final destination, It's more about how these different levels of needs and self-worth are always kind of interacting and influencing each other.
Okay, so it's not like a straight climb to the top. You can kind of bounce around between these different levels.
Exactly. Like you might be feeling really secure and connected one day, and then something happens, you lose your job, you go through a breakup, whatever, and suddenly you're like right back down at the bottom.
Having to like rebuild that foundation again.
Yeah, and that can totally mess with your self-worth too. So Ritzia is saying that it's like a much more dynamic process than we might think.
It's like that whole idea that life is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about self-worth too. Because it's not about being perfect. It's about recognizing that we're all on this ongoing journey of growth and discovery.
So if self-actualization isn't the end goal, then what is it like in real life? Like what does that actually look like?
Well, Ritzio actually gives some pretty specific characteristics of self-actualized people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like one of them is that they tend to enjoy solitude, but that doesn't mean they're like loners or anything.
Right.
It's more about being comfortable in your own company,
Yeah.
not needing constant validation from other people.
So kind of like having that inner confidence that you were talking about.
Exactly. And I think that can really impact your relationships, your decision making. Like you're not constantly seeking approval. You're acting from a place of self-assurance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What else does she say?
Let me see. Oh yeah, she also mentions that they're spontaneous and they take responsibility for their actions.
Okay.
And they have like a realistic outlook on life, They appreciate the journey, not just the destination.
So it's about like how you approach life, not necessarily about achieving some specific outcome.
Exactly. And that brings up an interesting question, doesn't it? Like, is self-actualization an end goal, like reaching the summit of a mountain? Or is it more of a state of mind, like a way of being in the world?
That is a really good question. But before we get too philosophical, Rizzio also gives some like practical tips for boosting our self-worth, right?
Oh, she does. And those are super helpful because, what good is all this theory if we don't know what to do with it? Totally. Like one of the first things she talks about is changing negative thoughts to positive ones.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah, it sounds kind of, cliche, but it really can make a difference.
How so?
Well, like imagine you're I don't know, learning to play guitar.
All right.
And you keep messing up this chord, right? Instead of thinking, oof, I'm so terrible at this, you could try saying something like,
Like, I'm still learning, but I'm getting better with practice.
exactly. Yeah. It's like you're acknowledging that it's a process and that
Yeah.
you're making progress.
Yeah, that's a much more encouraging way to look at it.
Right. And then another tip she has is challenging yourself both physically and mentally.
Okay, so does that mean like I have to run a marathon now?
No, no, not necessarily. It's more about like pushing your own personal boundaries, whatever those might be.
So like what would that look like for someone who's, not exactly an athlete?
Well, it could be anything, really, like taking a dance class or learning a new language,
Okay.
or even just like finally tackling that DIY project you've been putting off forever.
It's about like that sense of accomplishment, right?
Yeah. Like proving to yourself that you can do hard things, which can definitely boost your self-worth.
Right, right.
And this kind of ties into her third tip, which is focusing on perspective.
Yeah.
It's like recognizing that self-worth isn't about being perfect or having it all figured out. It's about, acknowledging your strengths, accepting your imperfections.
And just like trying to be the best version of yourself.
Exactly. And even when things are tough, there's usually something we can learn from those experiences, something we can grow from.
Yes, but choosing to see those challenges as opportunities.
And if we connect this back to Maslow's hierarchy, it's like even if we find ourselves needing to rebuild those foundational levels like safety or belonging,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that we're like less worthy as people.
So even if right now I feel, pretty secure in my job, my relationships, things like that, life could throw a curveball and suddenly I'm like scrambling to rebuild that sense of security, that sense of belonging. And that could impact my self-worth too.
Exactly. And I think understanding that dynamic is really important because it allows us to be more compassionate with ourselves when we're going through those dips.
Right. It's not a personal failing. It's just like part of life.
Yeah. And it also means that we can, proactively try to address those foundational needs.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's like self-worth is more of a journey, not a destination.
I like that way of putting it. And what's really empowering about Rizzio's approach is that she emphasizes that we all have the potential to increase our sense of worth.
Okay.
It's not some fixed trait that we're like stuck with. It's something we can cultivate and nurture.
It's like a muscle we can strengthen with practice, basically.
Yeah. Exactly. But what about like those times when we're just not feeling it, when our self-worth takes a nosedive and we're kind of stuck in that negative spiral?
Well, yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah. And that's where self-compassion comes in, which Rizzio talks about as another key component of self-worth. Like we need to be kind to ourselves during those dips, recognize that it's normal and it doesn't diminish our inherent value.
Right.
And that's where I think her integration of Maslow's hierarchy is really powerful, because if our basic needs aren't being met, if we're feeling unsafe or disconnected, it's going to be that much harder to cultivate a strong sense of self-worth.
It's like trying to build a house on shaky ground, You need to take care of that foundation first.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I think the biggest takeaway is that self-worth is not this unattainable ideal. It's a continuous process of growth and self-discovery that we can all engage in.
And it's a process that's like deeply intertwined with our basic needs, our relationships, our overall well-being. It's not just about like feeling good about ourselves. It's about living a fulfilling and meaningful life.
Yeah.
It really does sound like she wants us to like take charge of our own self-worth.
Yeah.
Instead of just waiting for it to, magically happen.
Absolutely. And she even gives some resources like in the presentation itself.
Yeah.
She lists some websites and articles that go deeper into Maslow's work and self-actualization and tips for building self-worth.
That's awesome. We'll definitely link those in the show notes.
Yeah.
For anyone listening who wants to like keep learning more.
For sure.
As we're wrapping up here, I keep coming back to that idea that Rizzio talks about, that self-worth can ebb and flow.
Yeah.
It's not like a constant thing, which is, I don't know, it's kind of reassuring in a way.
Yeah, totally.
But it also makes me think, like, what's one small thing I can do today to kind of nurture that sense of worth?
Oh, that's a great question.
Just one little thing.
Yeah, and I think everyone listening should ask themselves that too.
Yeah.
It could be like really simple, like acknowledging one of your strengths
Yeah.
or practicing gratitude for something you have in your life, or even just like taking a few minutes for self-care.
Yeah, I love that. It doesn't have to be this big, huge thing, you know? It's just those small things that add up over time.
Consistency is key.
And I think that's a great, great note to end on, that, you are worthy.
Yes.
You are valuable, and you have the power to create a life that reflects that.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into self-worth.
Yeah, this was great.
It was my pleasure. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself.
See you next time.